This is Karl talking management for the Globe and Mail. Today I'm delighted to have Professor Michael Porter, who's a university professor at Harvard here and just one of the biggest names in strategy around the world, to join us today. So good afternoon, Michael. And let me start by offering congratulations. You're on a doctorate from the Desautels School here at McGill University.
I was very delighted to get the invitation, and it's been a great day.
One of the things you talked about in your convocation addressed to the students is about the fact is that business has lost its reputation. Why do you see as business losing its reputation?
Well, I think that too many times business has been seen as acting in its narrow self-interest rather than essentially contributing more broadly to society. And I think a lot of that is not intentional. That is, I think many managers, I don't think they're deliberately trying to be unethical or not kind of be sensitive to social needs. But I think there's businesses have tended to look at themselves as really self-contained, and I don't think they've really understood the way in which they touch the community, and they touch so many social issues. And the standards, of course, the external standards have risen in terms of what is expected of a business. And the standard for things like environmental impact is much higher now than it was before. So businesses get caught by surprise. They're slow to raise their internal standards, and I think the reputation suffers. And then there's, of course, the outright frauds and cheats that, unfortunately, we've had too many of lately. And it's just frankly not only embarrassing, but it's just corrosive to the whole image of business. Despite the fact that business is fundamentally indispensable to any society. I mean, you just can't have a healthy society unless you have healthy companies that are making a profit, that are employing people, that are growing. So we have this tremendous disconnect. Business, in some ways, is the most successful institution in modern society, but yet, in some ways, it's the least respected.
So what should business do to get its reputation back where we think it should be?
Well, I think business has been struggling with this for some years now, and the usual sort of umbrella for this effort is called corporate social responsibility, CSR. It's a huge CSR movement. Companies are out doing all kinds of things to try to win friends and develop a better image in the community. They're publishing very fancy CSR reports with listing all their wonderful accomplishments. And all this, I think, is well-intentioned, but ultimately our work suggests that it's really relatively ineffective. If you measure success by image, I think companies are fooling themselves if they think that just by doling out money and attaching themselves to certain NGOs with good causes, they're going to actually get respected for that. I also believe that many companies are cynically viewing this activity as really marketing, and they're not really focused on the social impact that they can actually achieve with whatever it is that they're actually doing. So I think that CSR has been sort of a good effort in a transitional phase, but I think we have to move much more deeply into this issue. And I've actually written about that recently, and I've actually been working with a variety of companies in this area, trying to understand not how companies can try to build their image, but actually how they can sort of integrate their economic interest and the interest of the broader society really together in a sort of unified view of how to compete.
But won't that take away from profitability and in fact hurt the shareholder value?
Well, only in the shortest of terms. I mean, again, it's interesting that if you start to think about sort of the major issues that society is concerned about. So let's take the environment. So, 15 years ago, we thought that to have good, to be clean, you had to pay more and reduce your profits. And in fact, economists, of which I'm a card-carrying member of that fraternity, were just adamant about this. That the idea is if you put like any constraint on a business, that's going to drive up cost. So if you have to improve your environmental quality, then you're going to drive up your cost. Well, lo and behold, that reflected a very simplistic view of the firm and how competition really works. And what we find is that most pollution is fundamentally waste. It's wasted resources. It's the ineffective use of technology. It's the wasteful use of water. And in fact, the more environmentally efficient you get, actually the more profitable you get. Now, there may be a transitional period of investment where you do have to invest, but it's like any other investment. If you invest in improving your technology and closed-looping your processes and recycling your materials and taking unnecessary hazardous materials out of your product, lo and behold, you're more efficient, you're more productive. So that's just one example of where in this kind of old view of many social issues, there was a trade-off. You know, to be better for society, you had to give up your economic efficiency. But now I think we see those trade-offs fall away in many of the areas that society is concerned about. And so the challenge facing businesses is how to look for what I call the shared value. Look for those situations where a company can advance an important social issue at the same time as it makes itself more competitive. Look for those points of connection rather than the points of conflict. And rather than firing off small donations to 5,500 NGOs and trying to dole out little gifts to the community to be liked, companies will be much more liked if they can actually achieve meaningful social impact in 3 or 4 or 5 issues where their business gives them the resources and the technology and the skills to actually make an impact. So that's the new model, I think.
So the thought is to choose the 3 or 4 or 5 areas to look at your competencies, what you really are world class at, and then translate that into some useful action.
In the social agenda, absolutely. When we look at any company's connections with society, we can kind of identify those in 2 ways. One set of connections comes from the value chain. In the ordinary course of doing business, a company touches a number of social issues. So for example, if you're Nestle and you're buying coffee in Africa, you're affecting the plight of small farmers. If you're using water, and again, Nestle's a good example. They're the largest bottled water company. When you're using water, you're touching this question of sustainable water resources. And so for a given company, given its business, there's going to be 3 or 4 or 5 areas like that where the company actually, through its ordinary course of business, actually has an ability to leverage or impact that issue. There's going to be a lot of other social issues where it's important, it's a worthy cause, but that should be left to some other company which has the if you will, more the resources that they can actually do something about it. So again, taking Nestle as an example, because it's a well-known company, Nestle's kind of homed in on 3 areas. Number 1 is nutrition. They're a food company. They've understood that actually improving nutrition is not inconsistent with their ability to differentiate themselves, but actually now that they've thought of it differently, it's a way to differentiate themselves. And nutrition means different things in advanced countries where the problem is obesity versus developing countries where the problem is absence of certain critical nutrients in the diet. They've selected water for obvious reasons, not only because they sell water, but because they work with so many small farmers, and the largest single waste of water is actually in farming. And then the third issue they've selected is rural development, and that's because they're purchasing from hundreds of thousands of farmers all over the world in the developing world. So those areas, they can actually tangibly affect change in those areas because of their purchasing power, because of their expertise, because of their technology, because of their ability to create shared value. They can benefit themselves. So instead of getting this notion of corporate handouts that are constantly questioned by the shareholder, can we afford this? All of a sudden you've got a company that's investing in stuff that I think any thoughtful observer would say is really strengthening their long-term position, their supply chain, and deeply affecting their reputation in the communities in which they operate.
This has been Karl Moore talking management for the Globe and Mail with Professor Michael Porter, University Professor at Harvard, and McGill's latest honorary doctorate. So thanks again for your time, Michael.
Pleasure.